Content warning. This audiobook contains strong language, sexual themes, supernatural elements, and graphic depictions of death. The author recommends this work for audiences aged 18 and over. If you let your 6-year-old listen, that's on you. Moloch, The Real King of Horror by Ian Bailey. Published by Ashlar Press. Copyright 2025. Chapter 2. What happens at the cabin stays at the cabin. The phone rang sharply, its mechanical chime cutting through the quiet of the small house. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, glancing towards the avocado-green rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall. She sighed, picking up the receiver and curling the cord around her fingers as she brought it to her ear. "Hello?" "Martha, hi. It's Lena. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Martha shifted, tucking the receiver under her chin as she leaned against the counter. "Not at all, Lena. What's going on?" "Listen, the boys are planning a trip up to the cabin this weekend. Just a couple of nights in the woods, campfires, fishing, drinking. You know how they are. I was wondering if you think he'd like to go." Martha let out a slow breath, glancing towards the nook just off the kitchen where he sat, hunched over his typewriter. The small desk was crammed against the wall, covered in half-finished pages, crumpled rejection letters, and an overflowing ashtray. He wasn't writing, just staring, the keys untouched, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. Lately, his bad moods stretched longer, his frustration thicker. The latest rejection letter had hit him a little harder than usual, she thought. "I don't know, Lena. He's been in a mood. Spends all day in that chair, barely looks up except to light another cigarette." "That's exactly why he should go," Lena pressed, her voice confident but kind. "Come on, it's just a couple of nights. Fresh air, good company. He needs this. And honestly, you probably need a break from him too." Martha exhaled, rubbing her forehead. She knew how this conversation would go. He'd refuse at first, say he had too much work to do, that he was close to a breakthrough, even though she knew he was just staring at a blank page half the time. But maybe, just maybe, if she framed it right. "All right," she said finally, tapping her nails against the countertop. "I'll talk to him. No promises, but I'll try." "Perfect. Let me know how it goes. The guys are leaving Friday afternoon. Okay, they can pick him up at 4. As the call ended, Martha hung up the receiver with a soft click and stared at it for a long moment. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the checkered linoleum floor. A part of her wanted to believe that a weekend away with the boys would shake him loose from whatever had a hold on him. Another part of her knew better. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and turned towards the laundry. That evening, after dinner, Martha found him still in the same spot, the glow of the desk lamp casting sharp shadows against the nicotine-stained wallpaper. He was hunched over his typewriter, though she doubted he'd written a single word. A cigarette smoldered in the ashtray beside him, the smoke curling towards the ceiling in lazy spirals. Martha had already made up her mind before she even spoke the words. He could tell by the way she lingered near the table after dinner, washing the same plate 3 times, drying her hands on a dish towel long after they were dry. The way she finally turned toward him, pressing her lips together as if choosing her words carefully. "The boys are going to the cabin this weekend." She leaned against the counter, casual, but her eyes watched him closely. "Lena called. The boys thought it might be good for you to go." He exhaled slowly, rubbing at the dull ache in his temple. Not this. Not now. He didn't have the energy to argue, but he also didn't want to go, "I don't know, Martha." He gestured vaguely toward the typewriter in the corner of the living room, where a half-smoked cigarette sat cold in the ashtray, another wasted night of blank pages. "I have work to do." She crossed her arms. "You've been sitting in that chair for weeks. Maybe stepping away from it for a couple of nights wouldn't be the worst idea." She didn't get it. Stepping away wasn't the problem. The problem was that every time he sat back down, the words still didn't come. "I'm close to something," he lied, running a hand through his hair. She tilted her head, considering him. "Are you?" He clenched his jaw, fingers tightening around the coffee mug in front of him. He hated when she did this. Hated how she could see the cracks before he even admitted they were there. "You could do with the chance to just let go and do nothing for a change," she continued, her tone softer now. "Step away from the desk for a bit. Clear your head." "Is that what you think I need?" he muttered. "A bunch of guys getting hammered in the woods?" "I think you need something," she said simply. He stared at her, wanting to push back, wanting to tell her she was wrong, but wasn't she? The writing wasn't working. The trailer felt too small. The silence had started whispering. He swallowed, looking past her toward the window. The blinds were open just enough to see the street outside, washed in dim yellow from the street lamp. His stomach twisted. The Plymouth Fury was parked at the end of the road. His breath hitched. The same red and white car from Dunworth's general store. He blinked, willing his eyes to adjust, to tell him he was wrong. But no, it was there, sitting, waiting. Martha hadn't noticed. She was still watching him, waiting for an answer. He tore his gaze away from the window. "Fine," he muttered, pushing back from the table. "I'll go." She let out a breath, relieved. "Good." When she turned away, he looked back at the window. The car was gone. The unease sat heavy in his chest. The drive out to the cabin stretched longer than it should have, each mile folding in on itself, like a road that never truly ended. The struggling writer sat wedged in the back seat, packed between coolers of beer and crumpled bags of crisps, the smell of stale snacks and sweat thick in the cramped car. His old college friends, Matt, James, and Colin, bantered like boys on a joyride, their voices bouncing through the vehicle, filling every inch of empty space. At first, he'd been reluctant to go. He told Martha it wasn't a good time, that he had work to do, but she had just smiled in that soft, knowing way of hers. "You could do with the chance to just let go and do nothing for a change," she'd said, brushing a hand over his arm. "Step away from the desk for a bit. Clear your head." He wasn't sure if she had meant it, or if she just wanted him out of the house. Outside, the road twisted through the dense forest, a narrow stretch of faded asphalt winding between towering firs. The trees loomed taller as they drove further, their thick, tangled branches blotting out the last light of day. The further they went, the more the world seemed to shrink, the small town and all its obligations dissolving into the dark void of the wilderness. When they finally pulled up to the cabin after 3 solid hours of driving north, the sun was sinking fast, bleeding into the sky in deep, unnatural shades of orange and purple. The colors were saturated, sharp, like an image on an old television with the saturation turned up too high. The forest air was heavy with balsam fir, red maple, red spruce, American beech, paper birch, and northern white cedar, damp earth mixing into a scent thick with decay. But beneath it lurked something else, like the smell of rain before a storm. For just a moment, as he stepped out of the car, he swore he saw the trees shift, not swaying with the wind, but bending, moving of their own accord, as if something unseen was slipping between them. He shook the thought away, too tired and annoyed to be there to think anything more of it. As expected, the first night passed in a blur of beer and belly laughs, the kind of drunken nostalgia that only men who refuse to grow up can summon. They sat by the fire, tossing back cans and recounting stories of high school fights, college flings, the mysterious hot chick that got away that no one else met, and exaggerated victories. But as the night deepened and the beer loosened their tongues, the conversation inevitably turned to him sitting there getting drunk but not engaging in the conversation as intended. Matt leaned in, arms slung over his shoulders, breath thick with alcohol and the sweet smell of a cigar. "So, how's the writing going, man?" The struggling writer stiffened even more, uncomfortable with being touched, hugged. "Any bites from publishers?" Colin added, taking a slow drag from his cigarette. "When's that big book gonna be done?" someone asked. He forced a smile, let out a hollow laugh. "It's getting there." But they weren't satisfied. They wanted to know more. What the struggling writer didn't know was that this whole weekend was an intervention of sorts, conspired by everyone but him. "Maybe you need to loosen up, dude," Ray grinned, reclining against the nearby tree stump. The firelight cast flickering shadows over his face, making him look less human, more like a hollow thing wearing a man's skin. "You know, get those creative juices flowing." James, who had been rolling a joint, smirked. "I know what he needs." Giggling at the thought, he pulled a tiny plastic bag from the pocket of his red and black plaid flannel. Inside, a handful of delicate squares, thin translucent paper laced with fractal designs. "Ever done acid before, bud?" The struggling writer hesitated, heart beating a little too fast, unsure what to do. "Nah," he muttered. "That's not really my thing," he blurted out. "Come on, man." Matt leaned in, his voice lower now, more coaxing. "Just one tab. It'll open your mind a little." The others chimed in, their voices rising, merging into a single insistent chant. "Do it. Do it. Do it." A wind stirred through the trees. The branches groaned like stretching bones. The fire burned bright, erratic. The shadows around them twisted, reaching toward the struggling writer as if urging him forward. And then he heard it, a whisper slithering through the air. Not from his friends, not from the fire. Something else. "Do it." A deeper, more primal enticement. This was stupid, he thought to himself. But what if they were right? What if this was exactly what he needed? A way to break free, to loosen the grip of the constant rejection, the constant self-doubt. "Fine," he said as he snatched the tab from James's fingers. Immediately, without hesitation or opportunity to back out, he placed it under his tongue. It dissolved instantly, leaving behind a bitterness that coated his throat like ash, causing him to contort his face in discomfort. He swallowed hard, but the stubborn lump wouldn't budge. His palms felt clammy, his pulse loud in his ears. At first it was nothing, just a slight buzz, a looseness in his limbs. The edges of the world softened as if reality had been lightly sanded down. Then the fire began to move, not flickering, not dancing, moving. The flames coiled inward like hands grasping at something unseen, their movements synchronized as if they had become sentient. The smoke rose in patterns, forming faces, words, spirals that lingered for a moment before dissolving into the night sky above. The stars pulsed, their light warping, bleeding into streaks that smeared across the sky. The laughter of his friends became distorted, stretching and warping, melting into high-pitched wails and guttural howls. He blinked. His hands, they weren't right. Too long, too stretched, the skin shifting beneath his touch like melting wax. He rubbed his fingers together, but they felt wrong, as if the sensation was delayed, out of sync with reality, and then a new sound, louder than the others. Not human. Laughter, but not from his friends. At the edge of the firelight, a figure stood, watching tall. Unnaturally tall. Its form was made of darkness, but it wasn't just a shadow. It had weight, presence, and its eyes, not empty, devouring. Two voids pulling in the firelight, the world itself seeming to bend toward them. Inside those voids, tiny embers glowed, pulsing like something alive, something ancient. A name surfaced in the struggling writer's mind. Moloch. The figure grinned. You've come so far, it purred, voice like silk wrapping around his throat. The struggling writer wanted to look away, but he couldn't. And yet, every page you write feels like a betrayal, doesn't it? The words slipped into his skull, threading through his thoughts like a parasite burrowing deep. Every story, a failure. Every sentence, a disappointment. Every word, a wound that never heals. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, weighted down by something unseen. Moloch stepped closer, his form folding in on itself, shrinking into something human, but not quite. His limbs bent unnaturally as he became man-sized, his smile too wide, his eyes still too deep. "Let me help you." And suddenly the fire was gone, replaced by mirrors. 1,000 reflections, each one a different version of him. One stood on a stage, holding a book before a roaring crowd. One sat alone in a dark room, buried under unfinished manuscripts. One watched as Martha walked away, her back turning from him for the last time as she left with another man. Moloch's voice dripped into his ear, smooth and slow. "I can give you everything, success, recognition, immortality." But then he hesitated. His mind clung to the last fragment of doubt. A whisper of Martha's voice. "Come back to me." Moloch's grin widened, his voice soft, persuasive. "You get to choose, my friend. Your future is in your hands." The world pulsed. Then the mirrors shattered, and as the shards sliced through the air, the struggling writer felt himself lean forward, felt his lips begin to form a word. "Yes. Dude, you okay?" Matt's voice too loud, too real. The struggling writer snapped his mouth shut, vision blurring. He barely processed Matt's hand on his shoulder, the distant sound of laughter, the fire's crackle. He felt himself grounded back into the world for just a second, just long enough for his friend's voice to tether him. His breath shuddered out. "Yeah." But he wasn't speaking to Matt. Moloch grinned. "Yes, I knew you would." At that moment, the hallucinations didn't fade. Reality did. The world was still spinning when he woke. His body felt leaden, his mouth thick with the rancid aftertaste of alcohol and acid, as though he had been chewing on pennies in his sleep. The early morning chill clung to his skin, seeping through the fabric of his clothes, what was left of them. A groggy blink brought the scene into focus. The remnants of last night's fire smoldered, wisps of smoke curling into the air. The struggling writer lay sprawled in the dirt, his head resting against a log. His shirt was half unbuttoned, his jeans undone, and he realized with a mounting sense of dread his boots were on the wrong feet. Laughter crackled from the cabin's front steps. "Jesus Christ, you look like you had one hell of a night," Matt called, nursing a steaming mug of coffee. A devilish grin spread across his face. The struggling writer pushed himself upright, his body protesting every movement. Something felt off. His back ached like this for the first time, protesting that he's not as young as he used to be. James ambled over and handed him a dented tin mug. "Coffee? You're gonna need it." "Why do I feel—" He swallowed against the nausea, pressing his palm to his forehead. "Why do I feel like I got hit by a fucking train?" "Well," James smirked, "maybe because you were dancing naked by the fire." The struggling writer stopped mid-sip. "Yeah," Ray chimed in, stifling a laugh. "Not just dancing, either. You performed for us, man. It was magical. We got, like, front-row seats to the most erotic, deeply unsettling display of interpretive dance the world has ever seen." "You also thought beer was water," Colin added from the cabin steps, flicking his cigarette. "Kept chugging it and immediately throwing up. But that didn't stop you." The struggling writer groaned, rubbing his temples. His head pounded with a mix of shame and residual intoxication. He was too afraid to look down to check if they were lying about the naked part. "Oh, and, Matt coughed into his fist, barely containing his amusement. "You might want to check your face." The struggling writer's stomach dropped. Slowly, he reached up, running his fingers over his forehead. Ink. He scrambled to his feet, nearly toppling over, and rushed inside to find a mirror. There, in thick, smudged black marker, was a crude masterpiece of dicks and profanities scrawled across his face. He stormed back outside, met with the howling laughter of his friends. "You absolute cunts," he muttered, collapsing onto a log beside the fire pit, accepting his fate. James clapped him on the back. "Hey, man, it's a rite of passage. You were a legend last night." The struggling writer took a long sip of coffee, sighing as the warmth settled in his chest. He should have been furious. But somehow, as much as his head ached, as much as the shame simmered in his gut, he couldn't help but feel lighter. Martha would kill him if she ever found out, but for now he let himself chuckle along with them. The day stretched on in an easy haze. After a breakfast of bacon and eggs, the best hangover cure, according to Mike, they took their fishing rods down to the lake. The ice was thick, but the sound of it groaning under their weight made the struggling writer uneasy. The wind howled through the trees, rattling bare branches, while the lake beneath them let out deep, resonant moans as though it were alive. They sat in folding lawn chairs, bundled in layers, lines cast out in the hopes of catching some salmon for supper. It was peaceful until it wasn't. None of them noticed Colin's chair slowly creeping across the ice, the movement so gradual it was almost imperceptible, until crack, thud, splash. The moment hung in stunned silence before panic erupted. Colin was gone. Shit! Shit! Matt scrambled to his feet. The struggling writer's breath caught in his throat, his own limbs locked in terror. Colin's arms flailed beneath the ice, his body trapped under the thick sheet. His panicked face twisted in horror, bubbles escaping his lips. "Get him out!" Ray shouted. The ice was too thick. They clawed at it, pounded with their fists, but it wouldn't break. Colin thrashed beneath them, his lips already turning blue. "Fucking move!" Matt sprinted towards the truck. Seconds dragged into eternity. The struggling writer dropped to his knees at the edge of the broken ice, only as close as he could without falling in himself. Fingers becoming numb, scrabbling at the surface, as if he could claw Colin out with sheer will. His knuckles smashed against the frozen sheet, again and again, raw and useless. The ice wouldn't give. It mocked him, unyielding like the blank page behind him, voices blurred. Someone screamed for the axe. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. All he could do was hammer at the ice until the skin split and blood bloomed across the ice. When Matt came sprinting past, he barely registered it, just kept hitting the ice. Like if he stopped, it would mean something final. Colin's movements slowed. His eyes rolled back. Then a deafening crack rang out. Matt stood over the hole, axe in hand, panting. The blade had shattered through, jagged chunks of ice floating in the water. Ray and James lunged forward, plunging their arms into the freezing abyss and dragging Colin up and out. His body hit the ice, motionless, a sickly blue hue spreading over his skin. "Do something." James didn't hesitate. He tilted Colin's head back, pressing his mouth to his lips and forcing air into his lungs. One beat, two, three. Colin coughed violently, water spewing from his lips as he sucked in a desperate, ragged breath. Relief crashed over them. "Jesus Christ," Matt muttered, hauling Colin to his feet. They moved fast, dragging him back to the cabin, stripping off his soaked clothes and bundling him in blankets by the fire. The struggling writer didn't follow. Not right away. He stood at the door, breath misting in the cold air, hands still trembling and bloodied. The others barked orders, worked in sync, saved a life. And what had he done? He stared at the smudges of red across his knuckles, the sting beginning to creep in now that the adrenaline had ebbed. His fists had beaten the ice to no effect. No cracks, no rescue, just blood, just noise. The laughter from inside was distant, muffled. He felt like a ghost. Eventually, he stepped through the threshold, his presence barely noted. No one mentioned his hands. No one even looked at him. So he made tea. Colin sat shivering, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He exhaled slowly, staring into the flames. That was a come-to-Jesus moment, boys. Silence hung heavy. Then, unexpectedly, Colin let out a breathless laugh. Holy fuck! I actually saw a light. Thought I was meeting the big guy. Ray smirked. What did he say? Colin shook his head, voice hoarse. Told me to go back, 'cause my wife would kill me if I died out here. Laughter broke the tension, rolling through the cabin like thunder. The struggling writer, still gripping his untouched mug of tea, watched them from his chair by the fire. They had saved their friend's life today, and he had done nothing but boil water. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. They didn't fish on the lake again. They made an unspoken pact not to tell Colin's wife what had happened, not until he was warm, dry, and far away from the ice. Instead, they spent the evening around the fire, drinking slow and steady, letting the adrenaline settle. The struggling writer, feeling oddly lighter than he had in weeks, found himself telling ghost stories by firelight, spinning twisted tales until the shadows seemed to creep in closer. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. Not just the high, not just the fear, but something darker, something waiting. The drive home on Sunday was quiet, the kind of silence that settles between men who have lived through something together. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken about. Colin sat in the front passenger seat, wrapped in extra layers, still shaking off the chill of death. The others swapped stories, laughter breaking through now and then. But the highlight of the weekend, the thing they would retell again and again, was the struggling writer's acid trip. Funniest fucking thing I've ever seen, James said, shaking his head. You, prancing around like some pagan god, covered in your own vomit. I still can't believe he thought he was being chased by a fucking dragon, Matt added. The struggling writer just grinned, staring out at the endless road ahead. The real hallucinations hadn't stopped. Even now, in the daylight, he swore he saw something in the trees, just beyond the bend of the road, a shape, watching, lurking just beyond his vision. As they got back into town, the struggling writer was dropped off first. As the car pulled up to his place, he stepped out, slinging his bag over his shoulder. The others waited for a moment, appreciating his antics once more, before offering lazy waves as they peeled off towards their own homes. He stood there for a moment, staring at the small double-wide trailer. From the outside, it was the same as ever, just 4 metal walls, a door, and windows that barely let in any light, but after this weekend, it felt different, like it held something unknown, something waiting to be observed. Schrodinger's trailer, he mused with a smirk. Either it contained the same old story or something new. The only way to find out was to step inside, choosing to embrace whatever was waiting. He walked up the steps and pushed open the door. The scent of home hit him immediately. Faint coffee, a hint of soap. Something cooking. Martha was at the sink, her back turned, casually drying a plate. He stepped in quietly, watching her for a moment. The familiar sight of her, the way she moved, the subtle hum she let slip when she thought no one was listening. He had missed her more than he realized. Without a word, he stepped behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. She tensed for a brief second before relaxing against him, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "You're back," she murmured. "Yeah." His voice was lower than usual. He pressed a kiss to the side of her neck, inhaling the warm scent of her skin. "Where are the kids?" "Out playing." "Oh, good." He pulled her closer, the warmth of her body melting against his. She felt it then, the hunger in his touch, something different, something raw. "Oh, God," she whispered, half teasing, half breathless. "What on earth has possessed you?" He only smirked, pressing against her, showing her exactly what he had in mind as he hitched up her dress. This chapter may have ended, but the story doesn't. Return next Monday for what waits in the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and leave a comment to share what the shadows may have whispered to you.